Hey everybody, thanks for coming. We're going to get started in just another minute or so, but you are at the right place and at the right time. Just get started in just a few seconds. Thanks. Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. We are recording this, so appreciate having the audience. And as I've always said, if you've heard me before, don't require participation. You're more than welcome to put questions in the chat or anything, but I'm not going to just randomly ask you to talk or anything like that. So you're good just listening to what I have to say and what it is we're talking about. I'm actually really excited for this one. I had a lot of, I'm gonna be honest with you, fun as far as fun goes when you're putting together a training about just mental health in general during mass gatherings. A lot of the work I've done with you guys for Philadelphia's MRC has been surrounding, intellectual developmental disabilities, things like autism, Down syndrome, and that will be, part of this tonight, but this is the broadest we've ever discussed about populations in general. So we're going to talk about a couple of different areas that are a little bit more in depth than we've done in the past. As soon as I can get this to, there we go. I'm just trying to get this to start moving. Okay. So our agenda, events to plan ahead for is what we're going to be talking about. And, just the general, why are we talking about this? Why is this important? Talk about the psychology of mass gatherings through neurodiverse lens. So really, when I say that, if you weren't in my neurodiverse conversation or you haven't gotten a chance to watch the videos, really talking about anyone outside of what would be considered the quote unquote norm. So anyone that isn't considered average in certain areas. If you're curious about that, there's a whole YouTube video available out there from me at the MRC that you guys can take a look at. Sensory issues, whether that's an issue with someone with a specific diagnosis where you can almost anticipate those issues, or it's someone that's just got a lot going on that day, or we're utilizing drugs or something like that. So we're going to talk about the effects of drugs in different segments of the population, talk about mental health, evacuating, dealing with the heat, and some other real specific things that pertain to Philadelphia and positions that you may be in yourselves. So, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this, and why is it such an important thing that we're doing this with Philadelphia specifically? Um, there's a lot going on in Philadelphia, and it's already started for this year. You know, Centered around the fact that it's a city to begin with, and you have over 1 million people in your population. It's also the 250th birthday, anniversary, whatever you want to call it, of the July 4th Declaration of Independence, 1776, which is as Philadelphia centric as it gets. So we have a lot going on. Before you even get into all the things that are there because of the 250, um, just putting out into the general world, you have an old cruise port that is now being opened and utilized again. When you have a cruise port in your city, just like you have an airport, you're going to have people from all over the world speaking different languages, having different cultures. So that in and of itself is a big change. Cruise ports, if there's just one ship going out, you're talking about 5,000 ballpark passengers every single week going out of there per vessel. Not to mention all of the crew, which is probably another 800 people, depending on the size of the vessel. So you've got a lot of potential international, just a diverse group of people coming together in your neighborhood. And if I remember correctly, the cruise port is in the city proper itself. A lot of times, cruise ports might be, saying that they're in Orlando, but they're really like an hour away because there's no ocean in Orlando, things like that. So that's going to be a big focus for you. And not that you're going to have that as an MRC thing, but it's just another um, constraint or stressor or just another thing that your city has to deal with now on a regular basis. It's going to cause traffic jams. It's going to cause all sorts of issues. You're going to have people staying over in hotels. Like there's going to be a big change, especially in that neighborhood where it'll be. FIFA World Cup games, in Jersey, we're preparing for that as well. You have some specific games that start in June and that go all the way up to and include, I think, some playoff games into the July 4th weekend. Gonna have definitely gonna have international folks, and international population is no different than the United States population. You'll have people with different abilities and disabilities. You're gonna have people with different ethnic backgrounds. You're gonna have people with different mental health issues and drug and alcohol use and norms, what they might consider to be norm compared to what we are. Um, for example, I was very lucky, I've mentioned this before, to get to go to the Olympics a few years ago, and this was in Paris. Um, I have a child who is certainly under the age of alcohol consumption in the United States, but over there it was very much not a big deal. So that's just one of those like norms that you have to be just on the lookout for. It might affect some decision making, it might affect or cause some conflicts. These are just little things that are out there that are going to be affecting you, the volunteer. Wawa Festival, concerts, art, all sorts of stuff. You have the Major League Baseball's All-Star Game, and then you're gonna have fireworks, naval celebration. I think it's the Navyist. Um, I believe it's the Navy's anniversary or birthday as well, sometime in the summer. Themed events, all sorts of things going on at different times of the day and night. And fireworks is very important to our discussion for a number of reasons regarding mental health, specifically people with post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as people with hypersensitivity to, audible sounds. So why do we do this? Why do we go to these things? Why do we even look forward to them in the first place, right? If there's a training on how to deal with these, then obviously there's a good reason why people get together, and then there's some consequences when people get together. We like to feel part of a group at mass gatherings. Could boost your mental health. You go to a concert. When we talk about mass gatherings, we're talking about like concerts, sporting events, festivals, things where there's lots of people around. And being around other people can, especially when it's something that you're a part of, whether in that genre, so to speak. So if you're a fan of rock music or rap, you're with like-minded people that are into the same stuff. So typically that's something that people look for. They like to have that extra part of it. It's not just a concert, but sometimes it's an experience. Strong group identity helps people feel better over time. Philly has some reputations about their sports teams and how passionate your uh, fans are, and that gives a very strong identity to Philadelphia in and of itself, as well as the fact that people like to wear the hats, the jerseys, things like that. You're kind of putting yourself as part of that team. It's an identity thing. And it's worn by like a badge of car of honor, I should say. Like everybody's going on the subway or wherever, all wearing the same stuff. You immediately start having conversations with people that you would normally not talk to, strangers specifically. And those shared identities improve your physical health, your mood, your energy. People are invigorated by these things and typically like just like going to them. Being a part of groups can lead to relationships and lots of support as well. But there's also consequences, and there's the downside of things that we have to think about, the tangible consequences of mass gatherings. So number one, we all experienced COVID in our own unique ways over the last couple of years ago, and for those few years, one of the top things we were not allowed to do was have mass gatherings. Why? Because of infectious health risks, and I'm sure the MRC has gone over this a lot of times, but just for the sake of it, when you're in mass gatherings, your risk for infection goes up. No different than if you are going to school for the first time, if you're going to work in a hospital, if you're going on a cruise, there are risks when you are in a closed environment with people for an extended period of time, which is why you might hear things like cruise ships are at risk for gastrointestinal infections. No more than you are likely to get it on land, but typically we have closed. These vessels are closed, so you can't get off of it. So if one person goes on board, everybody is going to be at higher risk. So it's just a specific way of kind of identifying these things. There's also sexually transmitted infection potential. People go to different events, and those events sometimes continue on into the night for all sorts of reasons. So that's another risk of infection that you have there. And then we're taking these things from like a public health, higher level type of observation. This isn't something I hope we would expect to see ourselves physically in one of these mass gatherings, but it's part of the whole conversation. Um, and another aspect is the actual potential physical consequences. These things do happen. There are historical events that have led to people being hurt or killed because of like here with the Astroworld Festival crush, people, everybody like pushes towards the front, and at the front of a concert, if you've ever been, there's usually a metal fence that people get pushed up against that for a whole host of reasons. Sometimes it's related to the concert itself and the way it's being produced. Other times it's just because there's some type of stimulus going on in the background. Somebody hears a gunshot or something like that, people tend to run in droves together. And sometimes it's just not seen until it's over with, depending on what's causing it. But nonetheless, there's a risk for that type of thing. And then non-infectious health risks. People are just out there. Cardiovascular, trauma, injuries, alcohol and drug-related illness. If we're selling alcohol, there's going to be substantial risk, especially if we're in an outdoor venue, which a lot of those that we're talking about are. Heat, which we'll get into in a little bit, has a major effect on all sorts of different issues that can be comorbid and really dangerous to people. Structural and environmental factors increase the risks. So specifically, where are we? Philadelphia right now is probably a nice 70 something degrees. It's beautiful out. But if we fast forward to July 4th, it could be a 100-degree day, the day of a FIFA playoff game. Somebody that has high blood pressure but traveled from across the country or even from Philadelphia itself that paid a lot of money to get that ticket and that experience is going to try to sit there as long as they possibly can, regardless of what risk they might feel. So that's really a really bad situation. Now, again, I was at the Olympics and I was watching volleyball. It was outside and I was with my family and it was very hot and there's no shade. And I actually got very close to having heat stroke. I actually went down away from everything. I had to sit in the shade. I actually had some gastro issues. I was vomiting. I mean, it was really bad. I felt dizzy, all because of all the things I just said. I wanted to sit there as long as I could, despite my brain telling me to get out of there. I wasn't feeling well. Um, so those are the things that you have to really be careful for. No matter who that person is, they may not realize just how at risk they're placing themselves. And again, that's talking about just the general population without disability. Disability itself sometimes, as we know and we've talked about, raises the risk of comorbid conditions or conditions where somebody may have a disability for a genetic reason or whatever it is, and now they're at risk for other issues as well. So here we have these 6 types of disabilities in general. These come, I believe, directly from questions that are on the United States Census that are asked subgroups at times so that they can have an idea. The Census Bureau themselves have an idea as to what the percentage is or what the prevalence is of people that have these types of disabilities. They're not the most reliable because they're self-report. And not everybody knows necessarily if what their issue is considered to be a full-blown disability or it's a disabling condition when it's not being treated. So I'll give you an example. I am wearing eyeglasses. I was born with something a little bit more than the next person as far as having eye issues, surgery, all that kind of stuff. All of that to say, with all of that in the background, and it has a scientific name and all those things, it's still not at least I wouldn't consider it to be a disability. I don't have a vision disability. If I take my glasses off, I am now visually disabled. Not in the sense of what a government or something like that, but without my glasses right now, I can't really see much of what's on here. I can see disability population at a glance, but the rest of it is very fuzzy. So again, someone might consider themselves to be saying yes on that, and someone like myself might say no. It's it doesn't specifically ask, are you receiving benefits at times? Sometimes it's, not the clearest thing. But in any case, this is the prevalence that we know. And again, it's not going by diagnosis, it's going by specific traits or abilities. So cognitive disability around 14%, mobile disability really not that far behind it. As you can see, they're in descending order. Self-care disability means like caring for your activities of daily living or ADLs. So that's going to be like brushing your teeth, taking a shower. I kind of have an issue with the way this is provided because self-care disability can be a result of all of these other things. If I have a mobility issue because I'm missing my right hand and I'm right hand dominant, I have a self-care disability. I'm going to need some accommodations, things like that. Kind of getting away from the purpose of this talk, but just giving you that for, full understanding of the prevalence. Regardless, you can bet that somewhere around 10% of the people that you interact with have something in this, continuum, so to speak. Some general tips for dealing with the general public, let me go backwards. Dealing with the general public when you might suspect there is an issue based on the trainings we've had in the past. And I'm going to come back to some of that too. But in general, this applies to people with mental health issues. This applies to people with developmental and neurodiverse issues. And this would be the way to probably talk to most people unless you find another reason not to. Because you're dealing again with people from all over the place. You're not likely to be running into a person without issues if they're asking you for help or questions, generally speaking, right? So somebody from Philadelphia without a disabling condition, for instance, may not need your assistance to find things. Whereas somebody that's visiting from France to see the FIFA World Cup might actually need these things because they don't understand English to begin with, and let alone throwing more difficult language in there. So when you go to another country or you're using a different language, things don't always translate exactly the same. So you have to use very simple, concrete language so that there's no room for interpretation. I'll give you another quick example. This one's kind of funny. In France, you sometimes need to use money to use a public restroom. That was something I knew about, but you also need exact change. So I'm at a store, a very nice store with my girls, and it's a perfume store. We have them here. I forgot what it was called, but one of those places at the mall. And I'm looking around for a bathroom to use, and it's getting to the point where I this is becoming a problem. And I ask a woman for help, who works for the store, and I immediately knew what I was saying was getting understood because being in a store that sells perfume and cologne, if you know about, I think the fancier stuff, it's called cologne. Oh, cologne is called toilette. I'm asking for a toilet. So I know this is already incorrect, but she's bringing me to different parts of the store, and I don't know that she's wrong, but I'm kind of thinking it. So just based on the direct wording, there was confusion. So it's very interesting when you're working with people, even though you both can use the language, it still doesn't necessarily translate. So sometimes that's really hard to work through. Quiet and calm voice, no reason to be anything but that. Especially if somebody's yelling at you or raising their voice. Raising your voice never is going to cause things to de-escalate. That's definitely a one-way ticket for further escalation. Triggers are known, be proactive than reactive. If somebody comes to a tent and tells you, I tend to have issues after, 30 minutes, maybe have somebody go with them, find out what the issues are. If there's a group of people that'll be visiting that are reaching out because they have issues, just being proactive is always better than being reactive to things. Anticipate and prevent sensory overload before it happens. So if you're volunteering or you're at an event and there's going to be fireworks or something like that, it might be a good idea for the volunteers to have some type of earplugs, or if it's at a tent, have something like that for ear protection, or just be in anticipation that you might get busy once that's over with or during them. And then being reactive is exactly what I said. They're already in distress. Perhaps you can have some supports there, or even have like an area designated specifically for people with sensory issues. Maybe it's a little bit farther away. Maybe it's just got distractions so that they can participate in something while that's going on. There's a whole host of things that can be done, but planning for it is the point. Providing sensory tools, like I said, noise canceling headphones for sensitivity, even sunglasses. They sell, those sunglasses that they're usually like free from, if you go to festivals, they're handing them out to the kids. Sometimes just having those on for a few moments when the sun's really out there and sensitivity is strong to be helpful. Now, something that you'll definitely be seeing at mass gatherings, again, whether it's, related to the 250th anniversary or it's simply you out on your own at a concert and you see something that you need to potentially help. Talking about overall drugs, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, and THC. THC in its own category because it's kind of in this wonky, is it illegal? Is it not illegal? It's for medical, it's for recreational, depending on what city and state you live in. It's kind of decriminalized. So there's all sorts of things in flux. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's right now, it's March 30th, 2026. So it's possible that this changes because things are changing pretty quickly. But just to go over so you have an idea as to what these things are and why they're problematic. So intoxication is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody is on under the influence of take any of those four above. And you can be intoxicated from pharmaceuticals. People have a prescription for something, whether it's pain medicine, anti-anxiety medication. There's a lot of things out there that can be abused. So intoxication is something that, again, even a pharmaceutical is, probable and potentially out there. That's why we have controlled substances, so that the consumer can be aware that these intoxicating substances that make you feel really good are dangerous and have a potential for misuse or abuse. Um, you know, we could spend a whole hour on each individual drug, so I'm going to go as generic as possible for harm reduction and things like that. Intoxication, generally speaking, alcohol is going to be one alcoholic beverage per hour. We can metabolize those, generally speaking, and that's based on an average, not necessarily somebody that's really big or somebody that's really petite. And that's specifically alcohol only. Alcohol is going to have an effect based on the environment, especially like the temperature and things like that. But you may have people that are um, essentially addicted to these medications, these drugs, this alcohol, whatever it is. And that's also important to think about when you are potentially trying to help somebody that might be in some type of distress. Um, what happens is if somebody is taking that medication every single day, and then they get to a point where they don't have access to it. Say somebody is, again, flying in from another part of the country or even from another part of the world, and their medication, even if it's from a doctor, gets flagged or doesn't make it through custom, whatever the issue is, and they may not have access to that medication anymore. And it's something that they have to take on a regular basis, and for no reason other than it didn't show up with them in their packet, in their luggage. You can have somebody with withdrawal and with things like opiates, so like pain medication, heroin, and we're going to do I got a whole slide on heroin in a minute. But when you're withdrawing from those types of things, especially like pain medicine, because that could be a pharmaceutical, you might have somebody have a seizure. They may have acute anxiety, um, tachycardia, so their heartbeat is irregular and all over the place. A lot of different things that might happen. They might just be sweating. So you might be able to recognize some of these symptoms, or just when you're trying to help this person figure out what the issue might be and what you can do to help them, aside from getting somebody that's medically understood or licensed to be able to provide whatever is needed. This is something that you could be ruling out to help. The other side of it is overdose. Somebody is intoxicated, but they've taken too much of their medication and now they're overdosing. Miraculously, it could be some of the same things, labored breathing or really, really hyperventilation. You can have somebody that's obviously slurring their words, not making any sense, disorientation, euphoria, things of that nature. So those are things you need to look out for. above all, these are things that you need to get somebody help for. You want to find some type of EMT, paramedic, something like that if you're noticing somebody is having some of these symptoms. Just, for your own edification, tolerance is something else that's going to come into play in a minute as far as opiates go and the misuse and wrong drug. Here is for your own, going back and reading through this stuff, which, you'll get it, you'll have access to these things, is just a wheel of different types of medications, drugs that are out there and how they affect the body. It is incredible to see how large this thing keeps getting. Just, go back 10 years, a lot of these things don't exist. A lot of these things are coming through, like I said, pharmaceuticals, or they're being made and manufactured by the street. People are using them for illicit purposes. So looking at cannabis, THC, CBD, this is pot, this is marijuana. That's what we're talking about. But look how many different types there are. These aren't strands. So if you know anything, a little bit more than the next person about marijuana, it's almost like alcohol. There's different types. So there's types that'll make you feel a little bit more awake and some that'll make you feel a little bit more down. And that's by design and it's on purpose. These aren't that. This is specific manufacturing and figuring out how to make cannabinoids. We have cannabinoid receptors in our brain. So there are actual areas of our brain that are almost like the lock to a key, so to speak. And that's what these drugs do is they unlock that and you start feeling things. Here's your opiates. So there's a lot of here that you may not know. Some of these are actually, I think most of these are their trade names. You got some generics here. Some of these you'll remember possibly just from hearing them in the news and things like that. So morphine might be something you'd think about associating with surgery or being discharged, having a really, really, really tough surgery. Oxycodone, Percocet, things like that are the types of medications that somebody might get if they had surgery and they're on an outpatient, they're going home, they're going to have medication supply for a couple of days. What happens sometimes is people will take these medications and continue to try to take them and they can get hooked on them because of how powerful some of them might be. Sometimes there's too much access to these medications. There's a lot of research and clinical stuff being done about opiates and opioids more specifically. Um, Depressants, so we're talking about alcohol. A lot of people don't realize alcohol is a depressant, despite the fact that in the short term, sometimes it gives people energy and makes them euphoric. When we say depressant, and we're really talking about these outer categorizations, this is its effect on the nervous system. The central nervous system is becoming depressant. And when you stop drinking alcohol, so if you drink alcohol on an everyday basis, and then you stop drinking the alcohol, your body goes into very serious withdrawal and it's potentially life-threatening. So if somebody tells you that they're in alcohol withdrawal, they need help very, very fast. They will have seizures, and they also get to the point of having hallucinations. Delirium tremens is something that it's referred to. Typically, it's interesting that it's often seeing like bugs coming out of your hands and arms, and different places like that. I've seen people in alcohol withdrawal. It's very, very serious. It's actually more serious than heroin, which a lot of times people wouldn't assume that because alcohol is out there. They're sponsors of events, right? This bud's for you, all that stuff. But we don't do that with these other things because how deadly they potentially are. I want you to keep this fentanyl thing in your minds also. I'm going to come back to that in a second from the opioid side of things. Then there's these dissociative, ketamine is something that you're starting to see. Again, this is now no longer just part of the illicit, illegal side. Some of ketamine is being used on absolutely acute PTSD, depression, things like that. When I was in school coming up in graduate school, it was considered a horse sedative, essentially. Now they're doing these things called microdosing, where instead of taking, a full milligram or whatever, however it is, they're taking fractions of doses and they're noticing there's a sweet spot where the person doesn't appear to be under the influence. It's just enough to get them that extra edge that they need to function. This is something that would be done for that exact reason. We're not writing these prescriptions for somebody that hasn't tried a basic Zoloft, SSRI, something like that. This is being prescribed to somebody that's tried everything. Um, PCP is angel dust. DXM is dextromorphine. That is cough medicine essentially. Nitrous oxide is whippets. Salvia is like a not organic. I can't remember the name. Synthetic. Thank you, brain. Synthetic drug. So it's made by somebody essentially, kind of like how methamphetamine is. If you've ever seen Breaking Bad, it's made by people taking other um, medicines and drugs and all sorts of ingredients. That's how this is being done. Not quite as messy as methamphetamine, but nonetheless, that's there. The point is there's a drug here. And like I said, I could do a whole semester on this. There's a drug for every emotion that people are seeking. Essentially, at the end of the day, people do drugs, alcohol, thrill-seeking behaviors, whatever somebody is looking to get that natural or synthetic high from. It's people chasing dopamine. The same reason why you might like going to a place for really, really spicy food and you get to the point where you're sweating, but you feel really good about it. Kind of like how if you go to the gym and you have that same effect, that's dopamine, that's serotonin. You are, by doing those activities, stimulating the same receptors that you see being discussed here. Again, I'm getting a little away from the whole MRC aspect, but I wanted to paint that picture for you. So if you see somebody that might look under the influence, their emotions, this is another aspect of things that you have to try to rule out in your head because some of this stuff is potentially dangerous. So here we are with heroin and fentanyl. So only so many years ago, heroin was something that we obviously perceived as the worst, possibly the worst street drug out there. Since the introduction of a lot of the synthetic drugs, we've seen that drop out in the top contention, but it doesn't make it any less dangerous. Fentanyl is a drug that a lot of people in the public believe to be illegal. And what I will tell you is, in fact, it is a legitimate medication approved by FDA specifically for absolute acute pain. What's happened is it's cheaper than the real thing. It's cheaper to make than morphine. So just like anything else that people are trying to water down, so to speak, to make the batch bigger, drug users, drug pushers are putting fentanyl to um, make things either stronger or more of it, whatever it is, to make it more volume, more mass. And the problem is that there's different levels and of acuity or of strength of this stuff. So just off the bat, it's 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine. So depending on how much of each is in whatever it is you're using for that high, that's a problem. The other issue I want to bring back from earlier about tolerance is, again, if you have people from outside of the United States or even outside of this area, Philadelphia specifically, and they do go and try to find street drugs, there's a very high chance that that initial dose can kill them. Um, when you have a tolerance to something, there's levels of tolerance. And if you're, used to having, I think they measure them in bags, people will shoot, a couple of bags of heroin a day. That's how I used to count it. It's been a while since I've done direct opiate work, but essentially just for the standardized understanding, we've got, somebody that does typically 3 bags of heroin a day and they live in Texas, right? They come to Philadelphia and they get themselves 3 bags of heroin. The problem here is that the heroin in Philadelphia has been measured to be significantly stronger than a lot of other neighborhoods and areas. The Philadelphia specific heroin that's being tested has a lot of the fentanyl in it. Almost 80% of the overdose deaths had fentanyl in their systems. And then there's this other medication, metadimidian, is an animal sedative, and it's been recently, as recent as 2023, so there's no reason to think it has gone down. This is another way of cutting the heroin supply. And by cutting, I mean making it bigger. They're cutting it by adding more of this extra stuff to it. And it was found in almost 90% of the drug samples. So again, if somebody's coming from a different part of the world, country, state, you could have somebody that is really at risk just by trying that thing for the first time because they think their tolerance is tough. This is also something that happens in common with people that go away to a prison. They go to prison for a couple of months, years, whatever it is. They come out and they go to use it for the first time, and it's significantly more potent than when they went in to begin with, and they pass away. So it's a real risk. This is something tangibly that you might be able to intervene with. I apologize for the bad picture of this man whose pants are falling off of him. This is what people look like essentially when they're on fentanyl. You'll see them literally standing like somebody hit a pause button on them, like they were going to bend over to tie their shoes, and you just hit pause, and they just stand there like that. There's videos out there on YouTube. Unfortunately, Philadelphia has some significant issues with this specifically. Um, which means the supply is absolutely laden with this type of stuff, which means the people that are coming to town are going to be getting this stuff and they may not know it and their bodies are not prepared for it. So that's a big concern of mine. So just food for thought for your observations and what you're doing. We're talking about mental health concerns, mental status concerns. And let me correct myself. It's mental status concerns, not mental health. Your job isn't to go and figure out if somebody's depressed, if they're manic, if they're hearing voices. Your job is to really see if somebody needs some assistance, some help. We don't have to label it. And we don't have to provide anything other than just uh, good old rapport building and trying to build some trust with somebody. So, for example, if we have somebody with psychosis, right? Someone is hearing things or seeing things that aren't really there. And that's what you consider to be a hallucination. A delusion is kind of the same thing, but it's a disturbance of your thought, not your senses. So hallucinations are any of your senses. Delusion is your thinking. There could also be a mood fluctuation with this type of thing. So it doesn't mean somebody has schizophrenia just because they're seeing things. No, that doesn't mean that's their specific issue. It could be a mood disorder, believe it or not. Some mood disorders can be so acute that they, in fact, become psychotic. Not necessarily the same type, but nonetheless, it's still the same category, same level of danger and concern. There's also people with dementia, and you may have people, again, visiting with dementia. Could be somebody's biggest life dream to come and see the FIFA World Cup. These things aren't that out there as far as possibilities when you've got millions of people visiting. So dementia is another thing where I think people get upset when their loved one is fading, right? Nobody wants to see that. But I think one of the biggest tough things that one of the toughest challenges people have, volunteers or family members, is challenging that fixed delusion, that hallucination. If there is somebody in front of you that's telling you that they're hearing God talking to them, by you telling them they're not hearing God, you're challenging them. You're immediately pushing them away and you're declining their reality of what's real to them. The sky is just as blue to them as it is they're hearing God talk to them. You're not going to change that. So why would you try, right? So one of the better things to do, again, it could be someone that's psychotic, somebody that's intoxicated, right? Try to fight and be oppositional with somebody that's drinking, right? Doesn't usually work. Maybe somebody that's under the influence of marijuana, but alcohol probably not. And in your big venues, they serve alcohol. They don't serve marijuana. Could also be an organic or a medical change. We've talked about this before. There are types of things out there that will affect somebody's mental health status that have nothing to do with mental health psychosis in the way that we talk about it. Organic or medical changes can be because of diabetes. It could be that somebody has a tumor in their brain on a specific area. Could be related to stroke. All of a sudden, somebody is completely disoriented. They might be postdictal, which means somebody just had a seizure. Not all seizures look like they do on TV. Sometimes seizures could be somebody just sitting there staring. and they may look like they're not listening to you. So try to remember these things because sometimes, first responders or anybody really interacting, they don't think of these things, right? They think somebody, the first thing a police officer may think is somebody's being disrespectful to them on purpose, right? Especially at these large gatherings, first responders are going to have a lot of responsibility on them. And sometimes people react to them just because they're in a uniform. And that could be a good reaction or a bad reaction. But I have seen it myself so many times working in the hospital and working in the community, going out and seeing people that the police needed assistance with us. Sometimes people respect it. Sometimes people immediately hate somebody in a uniform. Usually it surrounds the police officers. So that's something that you might be able to intervene with and assist in that sense and helping that and develop that rapport with the person that's having some type of issue. Um, some things to build rapport with somebody that might be experiencing these things. Food. Food is a great thing to give the person. Obviously, find out if there's anything medical going on with them. Food, warmth, shelter, if it's raining out, something dry. Very basic tenets of human interaction go so far with somebody that is not oriented to reality. Um, Somebody that has dementia, if this is somebody that's clearly has dementia, somebody's telling you they have dementia, this goes back into your own life, right? Everything I'm talking about can be applied to people that are experiencing all of these things in the real world too, in your own lives. So somebody with dementia calls you by the wrong name. You prompt them to give you the right name, but if it continues on, and they're talking about something that happened, again, by being oppositional to them, the general idea is that you're going to agitate them, which will dump more cortisol or stress hormones into their brain and their neurologic system and perpetuate more issues in the short run, as opposed to just getting through the day and enjoying company and enjoying life while that's possible. Um, they also might be reacting to internal stimuli. I wish sometimes we were in person for these things because there are good ways of demonstrating it. But if somebody's in the middle of talking to you like I am, and then all of a sudden they just immediately stop talking or they start like that, like they'll just stop talking and they start looking around. It again, sometimes people think it's rude. Sometimes someone might say, "Oh, that this person has no attention span." There's this very small chance that they might be hearing something that's making them turn and look. That's called responding to internal stimuli. If you see that and you're concerned, bring it to somebody's attention. Again, it could be because they are have a legitimate mental health diagnosis. They might be under the influence of acid or LSD, or they have some type of organic issue that needs to be checked out very quickly too. The other thing I'm glad I just saw that one person talking, in any type of crisis intervention setting, some of the most important things is watching your body language. I got a whole bunch of slides on that. We're going to get to watching your body language and ensuring that it's one person talking. If you see any of these videos out there of somebody arguing with the police and it's going in the wrong direction, typically it's because there's more than one person giving orders and now it gets confusing. And that's to a person without any mental health issues, right? If you throw that on there, or disability, or neurodiversity, and you have all these things coming at you, think about that overstimulation, right? It could be a lot for anybody to have people barking orders at them and telling them what to do. You've never been in this situation, right? I've never been told to get out of the car, number one. I've never been told to get on my knee, none of those things. So to hear that for the first time, regardless, people are going to react differently than they normally do. So again, rule out medical and one person only, no need to challenge and build that rapport. They will remember it. Wanted to just talk about some more general population types of things that might be affecting people. Anoclophobia, an intense irrational fear of crowds, oclophobia, fear of mob-like gatherings, and demophobia, fear of people or crowds. A lot of these things, again, it doesn't matter. There's no quiz, there's none of that stuff. And then obviously you have claustrophobia, which most people have heard of. It's the irrational fear of confined spaces. That word right there, irrational, is in and of itself what makes a phobia a phobia. I am terrified of bugs. I'm not sure if you can tell, but because of where I am in my house, and it's warm out, I'm expecting stink bugs to start popping out because they like to come into this room in my house 6 months ago. So I'm already starting to look for them. Even though they can't hurt me and there's nothing that's going to happen, that's an irrational fear. It's a phobia. When you're literally like looking around for something that hasn't even happened yet, we're getting into the phobia. All of that to say, you might have people that tell you they're claustrophobic standing in the middle of the biggest venue you have. They could be standing on the field on the Eagles emblem and they could have claustrophobia, even though there's nobody physically near them for, 10, 20, 50 feet. Why? It's not always about being like you're in a coffin. Sometimes it's about being able to get out. So if you're in a row, like I have a little, I wouldn't call it a phobia, but I certainly prefer the aisle compared to the middle. Why? Because the second I sit down to watch a movie at the movies or a play, whatever it is, concert, getting on an airplane, the first thing I'm worried about is when am I going to have to go to the bathroom and how am I going to bother all the people to get up and out of my way? It has nothing to do with being scared that I'm going to get hurt. It's just this perpetual thing of, oh my God, I'm trapped. I can't get out if I wanted to. But in my sense, it's more of the I'm going to have to bother these people. So it's any of these things, and that may affect a person's mental status. If there's somebody that's really concerned and they can't get out and it's an unfamiliar setting and it's also super hot out and they haven't had water because you know Link Financial Field is charging $11 for a bottle of water, that's sometimes contributing factors to somebody sitting there longer than they should, like me, that was guilty. This is one half, and this is the other half of what's called a mini mental status exam. This is not for you to go and, practice on your friends and your family or anything like that, but it's just to show you, especially on the left side in these bigger categories, what it is somebody like me looks for when I'm walking around looking at a crowd, trying to kind of size up people that may or may not be suspicious for whatever reason that is. And when I say be suspicious, it's what it is I'm looking for. I'm looking for people that have all these potential issues so that I might be able to help them. So, some things that are important for you to be observational of, especially, we're talking about late spring into the summertime, their appearance and what they're wearing. Disheveled people is something you're always going to see, but inappropriate or bizarre. Well, bizarre dress is something that you might just see commonly in a city, and I mean that with all due respect. I'm a New York guy, walking around New York City, you almost have to expect bizarre, appearances. But inappropriate is the important one. I want you to think about. Right? It's a really nice day out today. I think most of us live in the area, so we know it's like still 70 degrees out as of right now. What happens sometimes is somebody that has an altered mental status or they have dementia or a disability, for whatever reason, they might dress like it's winter, right? Because it's something they've been doing for a while, and that's what they've been doing for the last few months. And not that they didn't check the weather, but they are just not dressed for the season, and it can hurt them. This has happened before where I've seen people that are dressed for winter in the summer and summer in the winter, and it does become an issue. So that's a hint that somebody might need some assistance. Speech, the rate, the volume, the tone, is it slurred? Is the person having difficulty coming up with words? Are they, slurring? Look at their physical face. Are they having any drooping? Because that's a stroke. Um, you know, different types of speech patterns that, again, I don't want to label anything. If it simply doesn't sound right, tune in a little bit more and see if any of these other things are happening. This is affect, so how are their faces expressing emotion? Flat or labile. So a flat affect is just no emotion whatsoever. And labile is somebody that's going from sad to happy and back to sad again, all over the place. That's an indication of somebody that might have psychosis, mania, things like that. So, and again, having those things doesn't immediately make a person of concern that needs to be removed. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying they might need your support. So these are the things that might be there to help you locate and address. How's their mood? That's kind of self-explanatory. Cognition means intellect. Are they oriented? As in, do they know where they are, what time it is, and all of that? How's their memory and their attention span? All of these together give you an idea of a person. Are they hallucinating? not always going to just come right out and tell you that. They may not realize it's a hallucination. If they see somebody sitting next to you and they're talking, to them, that person's just as real as you are. So they may not be telling you these things. Thoughts. Are they outwardly telling you things of concern? These things are obviously concern if they're having them. And their behavior. Are they just generally agitated? Can they not sit still? Things like that. Do they have good insight or judgment into what it is that they're doing? Is this somebody that decided to climb the subway and they're trying to ride it from the top? That's obviously not safe behavior. That's not good judgment. You also have some other things compounding your specific city. So Philadelphia in the past used to have about 4 days that were over 100 degrees. And now there's a lot of attention being placed on the atmosphere, climate change, all those things people are looking into. And the concern is that there's going to be about 55 days in, another 70 years or so, meaning it's on the rise. All right? They're not going to tell you how many they'll have in the next couple of years, but right now there's a big issue with your city specifically and other cities out there that trap heat in certain areas and neighborhoods. There are certain neighborhoods, and you can go and look it up by a specific neighborhood that would be 22 degrees hotter than others. That is a huge, huge difference from one place to the other. And again, if you're not dressed for it or, things like that, that is an insanely hot amount. And typically they're in places where people need that support more on a regular basis. Why is it an issue for the people I talk about, right? We know it's hot out. People know it's hot out. Why is it a problem for people necessarily with some disabilities? Well, here's an example of one of those disabilities that's very visible that you can get involved with. If you are observing somebody that has Down syndrome, right? And we go back to that, they have that specifically shaped eyes, rounded face, things like that. We went over that. There's a whole YouTube video just on Down syndrome. An extremely hot environment affects somebody with Down syndrome significantly more. So they have an overexpression of this gene. We don't need to get into all the science here. They have an extra copy of a gene. That specific extra copy is something that is affected more substantially by heat. So because of that, these receptors, these glial cells, these are things in your brain literally get inflammation no different than your lower back if you did too much work the day before. Inflammation in your brain is a really, really bad thing. It can cause all sorts of permanent issues. So that's why Down syndrome specifically is something that you can look out for. Offer drinks of water, let them know where it is, check in on them, start up a conversation. Those are things where you could be supportive without hand holding, and just letting somebody know that you're out there. Risk factors for heat-related illnesses. These are all medications on the right side. Medication categories on the right side, obviously with the exception of some of the drugs that are listed here as well. And then on the left side, these are the things where you can obviously, some of these are visible traits that you can see. Some of them you have to obviously talk to the person a little bit more. But these are a lot of risks for the populations that we typically talk about. Nonverbal communications. Like I said earlier, your people are traveling outside of their residential areas to come to you. You're going to have cultural, ethnic, and geographical differences, how people dress, how people talk and conduct themselves standing in line, which bathroom people use. You thought we had a confused thing going on in the United States with bathrooms and such going on over the last couple of years in that discussion. In France, if the line is out the door in the women's room, the women go into the men's room. It is not the reverse. That's not acceptable, but the one way is. I didn't know that, and I'm standing in the bathroom, and we have, people from another gender, and that was something I wasn't expecting. So there's things like that that are out there. Neurodivergence can struggle with those communication norms. Also, don't forget if something is going on, a lot of people's ability to express themselves goes away. So these are some of those things to really focus in on. Here's some observable language and emotion. This isn't the most scientific thing on the planet. I just want to put that out there. This is subjective. This is from somebody's book. The citations on the bottom left for your own research and edification. This is a former FBI agent that specifically did profiling and things like that, psychological profiling. So there's a lot in here that you could take a look at for your own ideas, but some of them are obvious. Like when we're thinking about that, putting something up in front of you is almost like a barrier. Having your arms crossed and looking somebody directly head on is confrontational. So there's lots of different ways that you can try to show somebody that you're interested or not. If this was an in-person, I could tell if you're interested in what it is I have to say based on people making eye contact, taking notes, things like that. We lose that in these virtual environments. We also have different risk factors that are going to affect the day that you might be physically out there. So it could be extreme heat. That's just one of many areas I've been hitting on. Some of the other things that I think you will absolutely see, storms, because it's the summer. You'll have geriatric patients, children, mental illness. Think you're going to have potential protests. That's not something I think is going to be going away in the next 2 months, 3 months, whenever it is. And worldwide events are exactly why protests are done, so that it can be seen by the world. So there will more than likely be protests going on. Protests aren't always friendly. So again, if we go back to these groups of people that have these types of things, that's a concern, right? That's a concern because they're not going to be used to it. It's going to be scary. So you need to really just arm yourself with as much as you can. Tools that you have at your fingertips. I thought this was a really cool slide. Google Maps lets you, if you go into their settings, they actually provide not just accessible routes, but if you go into the settings where you're walking, you can actually put down wheelchair user, and it will allow you to also provide feedback to, especially like in a city where one day that might be an open street and the next day there might be construction. So that's something that you could literally pull up on your phone. Hey, where you're trying to get somewhere, or we need to get you to a public restroom, but you're in a wheelchair and we're not going to be able to get you there. Let's figure it out. Like that's not something you need to wait for to be given. There's also sign language that you can also bring up on your phone. This link right here, I'm not going to do it right now because it's going to actually, let's see if we can do that. That link will allow you to, no, never mind. Let me close it. It's doing all sorts of weird things. When you get the chance, if you'd like, this is a mobile-friendly website. You can cut and paste this into your browser, and all you do is literally type, do you need help? Where can I take you? Do you need water? And this robot-looking thing will, oh boy, will actually begin to, whatchamacallit, will begin to move and provide that sign. It's really interesting to see. So, some final takeaways. Be the calm. I give a good example, at least it's a good example in my opinion, because it's the example that I use. Flight attendants. If anybody on this call or you can hear me when you're watching this on YouTube, if you've ever been worried about going on a flight, you're anxious for all sorts of different reasons. I like to tell people, watch the flight attendants. If you see them worried, now you can be worried. Until you see that, it's irrational anxiety, right? So I like to let people know that because 99.999% chance it's the more positive of the two. So I like to let people know that because it puts them at ease. And once they have something that's concrete and measurable, then they can kind of relax a little bit. They can kind of let their hair down, so to speak, and just chill and allow themselves to be just that much more calm. And you'd be shocked how much just a little bit of that support can make somebody completely at ease, which will then make the people around them at ease, and everything just kind of follows suit. None of this is as scientific as you could get. A lot of this is observational, a lot of it is subjective. The research behind it is subjective a lot of times. So, at the end of the day, you have to trust your intuition, trust your eyes, and just ask, are you okay? Do you need anything? There's nothing wrong about that. You're not going after anybody. If you just ask them, I'm somebody that can help you. If you need anything, I'll be right over there. It's that simple. You don't have to tell them why. You say, oh, I'm just going around meeting people. You don't make them feel bad about it. If you're trying to figure out if somebody has dementia, you don't ask them who's the president of the United States. Because if they don't have dementia, that's insulting. And if they do have dementia, that's insulting, right? Sometimes we try to get things out of people a little bit differently so that we don't make them feel like they are somebody that needs your help, because we're also very proud people, humans. So I might say, hey, what'd you have for lunch today? Did you have anything good for breakfast? Small talk. That small talk is also evaluating you. If you're able to respond, great. If there's a little bit of hesitation, it's a clue. It's not a diagnostic absolute, but it's something that's making me think a little bit more about what might be. Also, like I said, download some of those apps to your phones. Everything I showed you is free. And know where the exits and critical areas are. Where is the cooling tent? Where is the sensory space? If those things exist, hopefully they do. I'm sure that they do. But just know where those things are. This is your neighborhood. This is your city. I love that you have the opportunity to do these types of things with people from all over the world. So I will stop at that point and see if anyone has any questions. I'm gonna stop sharing, and if not, we can certainly call it a night. But I'm gonna just stop right here. If you have any comment, you put them in the chat or anywhere, and I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I think that is just about it. Oh, I see one. Mention apps. Can you remind me which? Yes. Give me 1 second. Well, there's the Google Maps, and then there was that website which you'll have, which we can get you because it's going to be on that actual form. So that is helpful. And then I'll get a list of them over to Satori. I think that'll be helpful. Sometimes it's better to have it in writing. Okay. If not, oh, we got some more. Hold on 1 second. Thank you. First signs of overstimulation volunteers should look for during large events. I would say somebody that looks agitated, somebody that doesn't look like they belong there. You guys, this is all for positive mass gatherings. This isn't other than protests, I should say. But if you're there, you're assigned to be at a FIFA World Cup game, and somebody's got a face that looks like they're mad, they're sad. So it just they don't look like they're enjoying what they're there for. That's a big sign. Somebody's physically stumbling. Again, that could be a mobility issue. You don't know. That doesn't mean they don't need your help, but maybe observe from a distance and see. Depending on what your role is too. But you can always give somebody a heads up if you're suspicious that somebody might be, a problem. You can always let somebody know, and they can kind of do all of that. But fidgeting too, and I don't mean like just a kid that's fidgeting. I mean like an adult that might be doing something that's just arousing your suspicion. I would say if you're in a venue and there's 10,000 people, something's getting your attention. That's what I mean by trust your intuition. And again, it doesn't mean go start talking to them and ask them what's wrong with them or anything like that. Just means just tune in your radio a little bit more, and try to think about all those things, the benefit of the doubt. Heat-related issues, drug-related issues, alcohol, all those things, people on medication, and diagnostic overshadowing, right? We don't want to assume somebody's psychotic when they might have type 1 diabetes and they just need some sugar. So for what it's worth, thank you all for staying for this entire thing. I think you guys are going to do a great job, and I'm really excited to hear how it all goes. So with that, I appreciate it. Please feel free to email me or Satori with any questions, and I will speak to everybody soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Jason. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.